All right, what is a prophet? What is a prophet? Like, there are many false prophets. I can think of 30 of them already. 30 people who predicted the wrong result of the football game this weekend. So those are not, that's not what we're talking about here. So I am like, my team was forecast to lose, and so I'm happy that those 30 prophets were not correct. Anyway, what's a prophet? A prophet means, the word means to announce, God's mouthpiece, a human instrument. God used men. The basic idea is that God used men to declare his message. Okay? So that's the basic, to announce. A prophet, the word prophet, prophesy, means that. Let's go to the next one here. Okay, so the meaning forth-tell. Okay, so this is like kind of like why do we get the idea that prophets are only about predicting the future? Because there's a difference. It's a small difference. Foretell is a narrow meaning. The foretell, which means you're telling what's going to happen, and then forthtell means you put forth the information. And so prophets were supposed to put forth information. Some of it was predictive, and some of it was exhortation, as we say. So prophet's first call was to give an exhortation. I'm telling you there's trouble. The king is a liar. You need to go talk to the king. Nathan the prophet spoke to David about what? About his sin with Bathsheba. So he had to go tell David, you're wrong, even though he's paid by David, close confidant of David. So first call was to give the message to get people right, exhortation. The next part of it, God did give them prophecy, did give them predictive events, give them, a vision of the future that would come true. All right? So, next part. So, descriptions of the prophet. Now, these are going through, I need to make a correction. I think it's, someone corrected me. The verse that I quoted from Jeremiah is 29:11, not 29:13, about the expected end. Man of God, servant of the Lord, messenger of the Lord, the seer, the watchman. These are the verses related to that. 1 Kings 12:22. Prophet is a man of God. He serves the Lord. It's the next verse there, 1 Kings 14:18. A messenger, Isaiah 42:19. A seer, like he sees things. And then the watchman. So all of these are sort of slight variations on what he's supposed to do. He sees what's going on. He watches over the people. He gives the message of the Lord. He serves the Lord. And in doing that, but ultimately he's a man of God. So these are some of the descriptions in the scriptures about the prophets. Next one. All right, now what's the test of the prophets? Now here's the interesting one. Here's the interesting thing. Like Deuteronomy 18:21 and 22. Do the predictions come to pass? Deuteronomy gives a warning to Israel. It's Moses' last book of the Bible. Moses' last writing or dictation, however he did it. But he's talking about, there's going to be a lot of people who come to speak to you, and you need to know. How shall you know the word which the Lord, how shall we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not happen to come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him. You shall not listen to him. So that's the thing. That's one of the things for in this predictive element, do things come to pass? So that's the idea. Do people turn to God from their idols or turn to idols? Does the prophet in Deuteronomy 13, is that the way that he does it? Does God, does his word of exhortation actually do something in people's hearts and help them become better believers? It's another one. Does he use charms? Like, does he use a Ouija board? Does he use a tea leaves? Does he use these crystals? Those kind of things? Does he use charms and instruments of divination? And this is something like, you're reading the Bible and you're wondering about Gideon. Didn't Gideon put a fleece down to understand? Gideon did not have the office of a prophet. Gideon was a hero. He was a judge. He was a political kind of thing. When a person's coming out and saying, this is what the Lord said, and the reason I know that the Lord said is because I turned my crystal this way, and that kind of thing, or the leaves spelled out, like those kind of things. They do not use charms and instruments of divination. God spoke against us. We're still in still in the 18. It says, there shall not be found among you anyone who makes her son or daughter pass through the fire, or who practices witchcraft, or is a soothsayer, or who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, conjures spells, a medium, a spiritist, or one who calls up from the dead. All who do these things are an abomination, God says. So, and the other thing, the last thing here is there must be some element of the Messiah in the center of their prophecies and predictions. Revelation 19:10. The Spirit of Jesus is the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. That's what it says in Revelation 19:10. So the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. So this is the test. Okay, so we have these writing prophets that we're talking about, but that's not like the first. In the earlier days, we have some people here. Jude 14 talks about Enoch. There's a book out there called the Book of Enoch that you might have, you might be in, you might get a hankering to read sometime, but it's there. It's mentioned in Jude. Enoch walked with God and was not. He, that's what it talks about in Genesis. So Enoch was speaking of the evils of the age. What was happening before the flood? Men's thoughts were only evil continually. So there were people speaking for God even in those days. And speaking of Noah, Noah does give a forecast of what will happen in his sons' lives. He tells the future of his sons. Genesis 20, this verse 7, tells us that Abraham was also called a prophet. And again, remember the primary definition, to speak forth something about God. So Abraham believed God. He was accounted righteousness. It counted to him for righteousness. So Abraham's belief in God gave him Abraham had 7 encounters with the Lord. So he had a very active faith. So Jacob and Joseph also, same thing. They're called prophets in the books of Genesis there, 37 and 49. Samuel, in 1 Samuel 19, Samuel is called by God. He hears God's voice. He becomes a prophet, and then he starts a college or a teaching time for prophets because he recognized the need for men to be taught the words of God, the law of God as it was written in the books of Moses. And then, so he understood the loneliness that can be there. And there wasn't, so this is like the first idea. Where does Bible college come from? And this is probably a good place to start. 1 Samuel 19:20. Samuel started a group to teach about what it meant to listen to God and hear from God. And then we have these two guys, Elijah and Elisha, 1 and 2 Kings. They challenged the kings of Israel, which is the northern kingdoms. They were the challenge, and miracles, 7 miracles in by Elijah, calling fire down on pagans. Pagan priests were killed as fire. Fire came down on the sacrifice, and then Elijah killed 450 priests that were worshiping the pagans, and Elisha, 14 miracles in his life, and then 13 in his life, and then 1 with his bones in the grave. That's the 14th miracle. Elisha asked for a double portion of Elijah's spirit before Elijah was taken up by the chariots of God. And then Elisha, there's 13 recorded miracles while Elisha was alive. And then his bones were in his grave. They threw a dead man on top of them, and the dead man came back to life. That's number 14 there. So these are just the prophets weren't the first. These were like the pre-writing prophets, they call. You'll find that word used in some books. Okay, so how did God speak? And we know from this, like God spoke to Joseph in dreams. We see that in Genesis 39. Visions. Daniel had visions and interpreted visions. The voice of God. Samuel heard the voice of God. And then in Hosea 1 and Joel 1, there's an inner voice. God impresses the heart. So we see in the scriptures that there's different ways that God communicated to the men that he was going to speak through. And it's like, it's not so what is it? It's not so predictable or so, different ways that God spoke to these people as they were called by him to say things for God. You all right? Doing okay? Good. Okay. Let's move to the next one. The presentation. Okay, there is a word on like, how did the prophets speak what they were supposed to say? Okay, well, first is the word of the tongue. That was their primary purpose, was just to preach. They got a word from God, you tell it. It's pretty simple. God gives them the unction or the burden or the anointing for something to do, and they go out and they speak that. So that's the primary way. 2 Samuel 23:2, there's a word on the tongue, I've got to say it. It gets even more powerful in Jeremiah. Jeremiah is very tortured by what he has to say, but it becomes like a fire in his bones. He can't keep the word inside. He has to tell the truth. And so that's the primary thing. But there's other things that happened here. Visual expressions, or what do we call these? Object lessons. You know what they are? Object lessons? You heard that? I was going to give you some object lessons. And sometimes it's kind of interesting, Hosea was a prophet, and the first part of his story is he's going to marry Gomer. And God is saying, you're going to marry this woman, and she is going to cheat on you. And she's going to cheat on you in the worst way. She's going to become a prostitute, a wife of adultery and promiscuity. And the prophets and God is saying, but you're going to marry her, And so he marries her, he has children, she runs away from him and does everything that she does. And then God says, and now you're going to go find her and bring her back into your home. Object lesson. So call a God on your life. What will happen in your life? Could this happen today? Could this happen now? I think Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. We don't know. We just don't know what God is going to call us to do. But I don't think that he's going to call you like Isaiah to walk around naked and barefoot for the space of 2 years. I think if you come and tell me that, I would have a serious, God does do things in context, and part of the context is that, who is the guy that stayed in there's this magician or illusionist that stayed in London. He stayed in a clear room or something like that for David Blaine or something like that. Isn't that their guy that did that? Anyway, I'm sorry. I just my random things. Ezekiel built this is the whole thing. In Ezekiel 4, he built a brick model of Jerusalem, and then, a nice little Lego model kind of thing, made out of, not Legos back then, but he had to lay on his side by it for 300 days, and then he had to lay on his other side for 90 days or something like that. I don't think I have the numbers quite right. But he was saying just how long God had been gracious to Jerusalem and how long that they were going to be in trouble. And then this one, Jeremiah got a nice pair of underwear, and God said, go bury it. Go miles, 60 miles, 60 kilometers, 100 kilometers or whatever. Go from Jerusalem all the way over to the Euphrates and river, and I want you to bury this in the clay by the Euphrates, all right? And so he goes and he does that, and he comes back, and then 9 months later or a year later, he says, all right, now go find your underwear. And so he goes back to the Euphrates and finds, and it's ruined. You can't put it, it's ruined. And that's an object lesson. This is what Israel is like. It's I wanted them to be close to me, but they've exposed themselves to all of the elements of the world, and now they are rotten. You ever leave a shirt on the ground in a humid thing, and you come back, you meant to wash it, but it's sweaty and wet, and it stays there, and you come back and surprise, it's got mold all in it, and you can't wash that out. It's dead. It's Leviticus calls that a leprosy of the garment. You know that? You want to see leprosy? Leave a wet, sweaty shirt around for a while, and it'll get leprosy. Just like the garment. If he picked it up and it was rags. So And then Ahijah, this is a prophet, a previous prophet, not a writing prophet. He met after Solomon died. He met this one man, and he tore the garment. He tore garment into 12 pieces, and he told Jeroboam. There's Rehoboam, who was Solomon's son, and Jeroboam, who was an administrator. He said, take 10 of these pieces. And he took 10 of those pieces, and that prophecy came to pass that Jeroboam, the political administrator, would lead the northern kingdom, would lead 10 tribes away from the united kingdom of Israel. And Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, will be left with 2. So these are the things that sometimes the prophets are given object lessons to do, sometimes very personal object lessons, like with Hosea. Ezekiel also had Ezekiel was told at one point that your wife is going to die, but you can't do any of the things that people do when they mourn. You can't cut your beard. You can't tear your clothes. You can't weep. It's like, because this is, the trouble is going to be the trouble and death that's coming to Israel, what God was forecasting, the trouble and death that's coming to Jerusalem is going to be so overwhelming that people will not have the time to properly mourn the death that's around them. So that's just, God's dealings with the prophets. All right, so the prophets really spoke the message of the coming Messiah and the instrument Israel through which the Messiah would come. This is the two things. The Messiah would come. What would be the vehicle for the Messiah to come? The vehicle for the Messiah, as far as a nation goes, would be the nation of Israel. And this is solidified in these 4 scriptures. I'll go to Hebrews here. Hebrews 10, we'll read this one, 10:7. Then said I, behold, I have come. In the volume of the book, it's written of me to do your will, O God. Jesus quoted that scripture also. So he came into the world and said these things. Luke 24:44. Says, these are the words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all things must be fulfilled which are written in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms concerning me. Acts 10:43. These are good meditations if you want to think about a guided meditation, a thinking process while you're trying to read all the Bible till the end. Some of you are already like a little stymied by that. It's like, just give it a try. I'm just asking you to give it a try. Give it the old college try, okay? To him, all the prophets witness that through his name, whoever believes in him will receive the remission of sins. This is the message from Peter. The message from Peter here saying, to him, all the prophets witness. All the prophets witness. Peter says this again in his epistle. His first epistle, 1:11, Peter talks about the Old Testament solidifying the person of Christ, the person of searching that or what manner of time the Spirit of Christ who was in them, indicating when he testified beforehand the sufferings of Christ and the glories that would follow. Verse 10, of this salvation the prophets have inquired and searched carefully, who prophesied of the grace that would come to you. So the prophets prophesied of this gracious Messiah coming. So, all right, the importance of the prophet. They declare the sovereignty of the Lord and that Christ is his king. That's their message. It's like God made all this, and the person that he made to be the ruler over it all is Christ. They declare the providence of God or the provision of God or the supply of God to his people in every age. So that is really what we are here. Like we are, in essence, like as believers in Christ, as disciples who have been called to share the message and to make disciples of all nations, we are called really to reveal that God is amazing, that no weapon formed against us shall prosper, those kind of things. We are called to share that to people in every age. And God uses things to declare that. A destination, all right? So they show the sovereignty of the Lord, the providence of God. The sovereignty of the Lord is like maybe the middle of that word is reign, like sovereignty. Reign is a part of that. That means the God's overall authority, his omnipotence, his omniscience, all of that. The providence is a personal kind of attribute of his, like he provides for his people. And then as far as history goes, God has a destination. There is an expected end. As I said, I corrected that 29:11 in Jeremiah. God knows the plans that he has to bring you to an expected end, right? So history's going somewhere. And then there's destiny. So there's destination, which is place, and then there is destiny. You're going. Like there's a place, everyone will live forever somewhere. You ever heard that? That's like an old Charles Stanley sermon. Everyone lives forever somewhere. It's like everyone born on the earth has what's called everlasting life. The life had a beginning and it will have no ending. Now that life after this in the lake of fire will be one of decay, depression, discouragement, separation from God, but it will not extinguish itself. It will be a constant dying, but it will be like you will be dying all the time, but never dead completely. So that's a destiny. So the prophets speak to that. So the prophets speak of the destination of history, where history is going, and then as far as the people who live in every age, their destiny, where are you going? So where is history going? Where are you going? So, all right. Now these are important verses because it talks about, this is another sort of meditation. If you want to think of this, you go through the Bible and you look at these verses and you're wondering, is God, as far as the sovereignty of God, this is maybe the ultimate. He is the Lord of the spirits of all flesh, or the Lord of all flesh. It says, let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, set a man over the congregation. And this is just a general kind of communication that God is making to Moses about their life that's going to be happening in the land. And this is really the transition from Moses to Joshua. And God, Moses speaks, the God of the spirits of all flesh. So that's one declaration. Isaiah makes this declaration too in this 66, chapter 66. It's a verse that's repeated in Isaiah. In Luke. In Isaiah 66:23, it says, and it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh shall come to worship before me, says the Lord. Psalm 22. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before you. God is the Lord of all flesh. God is the Lord of all the nations. He is sovereign of all this. Let's go to the last one here, Revelation. But these 6 verses really declare the Bible. God does not, there's this, does God claim to be in charge? Yes, he does. He does claim to have sovereignty over all that's going on. Verse 4 of Revelation 15, who shall not fear you, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy, for all nations shall come and worship before you, for your judgments have been manifested. So the end of the matter is that all flesh, all nations, there's the destination and the destiny of what's happening in history is related to the sovereignty of God. God is over all, and he's communicating that message, that reality to his prophets. And so that's the center of their message. They have to understand that, and they communicate that for us. All right, themes of the prophets. Okay, well, one of the big ones is, as we see, exposes sin, the sin practices of the people. All right, so I'm just going to tell you, you're worshiping idols. God has told me you are worshiping idols. So that's the one thing, exposing or revealing, like this is sin, putting the finger on the problem, like this is sin. And so this is, maybe it hasn't been such a big deal, but Leviticus 18:22 is a big deal. It's like that's the idea of a man should not lie with a man shall not lie with another man as he lies with a woman. That's the very clear declaration in Leviticus, and then in Romans, Paul himself, like everyone thinks the New Testament is full of grace toward this alternative lifestyle. It's like a prophet has to preach what the Bible says concerning this kind of relationship. All promiscuity, man, man, woman, woman, any kind of physical relationship outside of marriage, it is sin. And the prophet of God has to put the finger on it and says, this is not according to the order that God has established for his creation. So, and so that may be something that has to be communicated. So you recall people also, the next thing is recalling to the moral, the ceremonial, and the civil laws. Like, okay, so moral laws related to your family relationships, civil laws related to your neighborhoods, and then ceremonial law related to your church or your temple. So a prophet is saying, like, your family life needs to be, like this, like your family should be this way. And you should relate to your neighbor. You should love your neighbor as you love yourself. And then the last thing is, like, there's certain things that God has given ceremonial, like, and we say, well, that's just like ceremony. Isn't that just like empty practices? Well, God did not give those practices for empty reasons. He gave those practices to give us a way of worshiping him and give it structure and give it context. There is order to it. We know that the earth travels around the sun how many times during the course of a year? One time. God set that in motion. In Psalm 119, it says that God did that, and his ordinances are his servants. So God establishes ceremonies. In this part, this is where I was, right? This is the place of the priest. God establishes these ceremonies for a sense of order to serve him and to bring us and give us some sort of contact point for him. And so they are not evil in themselves. They are not empty in themselves. When the Spirit of the Lord is there and the prophet is preaching and the priest is practicing and leading the practices, then it all works together. It all works together to bring people closer to God. So a prophet is going to have to say, like, you're missing church. It's like, well, I have a really good relationship with God on my own. It's like, wow, you just don't believe the Bible, do you? Okay, so that would be a prophet saying, okay, and all right. Warning of the coming judgment, that's the next thing, themes, and then the anticipated coming of the servant of the Lord, the Messiah. So these are recurring themes in that. You can break them down to these four. It's like, so pretty much everything that the prophet talks about falls into one of these four categories. Judgment's coming. You need to get yourself right in these areas. You need to stop the practicing of sin, and you need to recognize that Christ is coming. All right, next. So there's time frames too. So we have themes and time frames. So the prophets are speaking about their own day. That's one thing that's happening. Captivity, in this time frame of Israel was taken control of. Israel was an independent kingdom. Now they're not going to be an independent kingdom. They're going to enter into a period of captivity that's going to happen, and they're not going to. So as of 586 BC, Israel is now a political entity, but it's not the kingdom that it was at that point. It's a political entity since 1948, a political entity, but since 586, they have not had a king. They have not been rulers of their own territory. Whatever you want to call what's going on now, it's a different kind of government. It's not the kind of government that God established in terms of when he sets Christ on his throne. So the captivity means that Israel lost its place as an independent nation, and the people were moved from there. So the first coming of Christ, so they also talk about that. That's another time frame. And then the second, and the rule and reign of the Messiah, that's the future when Israel will accomplish all that, and that's a different period of time. Israel will have its throne, it will have its territory, it will have its rule, There will be a time in the future when Israel will be the center of world government. It will be the one nation that all the other nations will have to appeal to under the rulership of Jesus Christ, their King. So that will come. That will come, but there's a lot of things to happen between that. The rapture would be the next thing when the church goes up. And so the first coming of Christ is when he first came on earth, and then this last coming of Christ when he comes in the clouds with his chariots and all of his saints. He will return to the earth that way, and then we'll establish the rule and reign. All right, you okay? All right, you with us? Okay, all right. All right, so we get lessons here. So what are some lessons that we can get here? Moral history. That's one thing that happens. There's moral history that repeats itself. People generally fall away, and this moral history repeats itself. How's it go? Falling away from God leads to disaster and destruction. People forget the morality, the preaching of the commandments, those things that would give them a good life, and then they fall away, and it leads to disaster and destruction. And so the lessons, so they're saying this thing happens again and again, and if you haven't, you learned that when you fall away from God, there's disaster. The next one is turn from that wicked way and to the living God, the creator of heaven and earth. And then they always make these connections, like the condition of the heart life leads to conditions in practical life. Ecologically, like there are droughts and things like that. Meteorology, ecologically, like the land begins to fall apart. The abuse of the land, storms and things, meteorology, problems with humans, human relationship problems, anthropology, and problems in cities and society, these kind of things. We're going to see this in a second here. Cycles of discipline. So this is we see this. This is like a great teaching in the Bible, the cycle of discipline. Whom the Lord loves, he chastens. What's chastening mean? Yes. Discipline, spanking. We don't spank. I'm sorry. Is that allowed? It might not be allowed in some of your countries. Sorry. But disciplining. So individuals, cities or communities or nations get the chastening. God loves. God is love, so he is really concerned about the development of people as a whole. So the history of the Jews, periods of discipline, and then responses and recovery throughout their generation. So you see the cycles. Judges is like a 7 set. There's in the book of Judges, you'll see 7 sets of cycles of the nation falling away, a hero being raised up, people listening and enjoying a revival of righteousness, and then them going back into their old ways. And it's like there's 7 cycles of discipline that cycle through that. So let's go through these things. So the first cycle of discipline, Leviticus, you can read these things. Leviticus 26 talks about this: illness and disease, crop destruction, defeat on the battlefield. There's a scorning, a sneering at authority, and accelerated sublimation. That's just a big term for multiplication of cable TV channels. Okay? Accelerated sublimation. Okay? The word sublime means that you were made for royalty. You were made, I was made, the human race was made to be the king of the earth. They were made to have dominion. Sublimation is an effort to substitute comfort for the royalty that we are supposed to live under. So the more things that you multiply that turn you away from living before God, so there's accelerated sublimation. This is like the first cycle. This is what you'll notice. So you'll see America in a lot of this. I'm sorry. I grew up, we had about 6 channels on the TV, and it was black and white. Yes, I am that old. So anyway, and one summer our TV blew up and Mom wouldn't replace it. So we couldn't watch The Little Rascals. We couldn't watch Spider-Man. We had to go to the bookmobile and read books. Wow. Turned me into a writer. So I read a bunch of books over the summer, mostly sports books. So anyway, second cycle. This is related to government pretty much, and bad decisions. Bad decisions on the environment, like misuse. One of the things you'll find out at the end of 2 Chronicles is that the fact that Israel did not honor God's command to let the land rest every 7th year. You plant, you harvest, you plant, you harvest, you plant, you harvest. The land rests. You don't plow, you don't plant, you let it grow wild for a year. Sabbath rest. You can eat what grows there, but you don't do any work on the land. And God said, there's a reason why I took you into captivity and why the land of Israel became not so much a land flowing with milk and honey, but something altogether different from it. God said he would lead you into it. So the bad decisions on the environment, trade, like unfair practices, cheating, that happens. Labor and management, like bosses not treating their workers properly and workers not treating their bosses with any honor. So that can happen. Investment, like people doing like wild kinds of schemes with investment, basically trying to make money without working for money, disorder. It's like disorder. You're gonna get, the lottery is all built on this. All I have to do is like get the right numbers and I don't have to work for life. It's all of that. And production, like limited production, like people were made to have a capacity. They have like, I forget where this is. There is a place, I know where it is, in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe used to be known as Rhodesia. It was the breadbasket of Africa. Right now, it is like a disaster. It is a disaster. It is like the government has started, the dictator who rules, he's a dictator, right? Is that what we call him? What would we call him? Mugabe. What would we call him? Who is he? Robert Mugabe. He's a dictator, and those who know African history can tell me, but he's been there for years. He's controlled all of the land, kicked all the farmers off the land, and now a country that used to produce, multitudes and multitudes of grain and wheat and everything. The production is, there's a cycle of discipline in the land there. All right, now here's another one, the third cycle. A dominant criminal element in society. The wild animal metaphor in this is like wild animals. There's a wild animal metaphor in there. It's for crime and mistreatment of children, more shady business, and the roads are deserted. You can read the story like before John Wesley became a preacher in England, that people were fearful of traveling because of so many bandits out there. Virtually no commerce, no trade because of this criminal element that's in society. And there's I forget what psalm it is, but it says that, one of the, I don't even know if it's a psalm. One of the prophecies, we'll read it when we get there. But one of the great things about the future is that the children and old people will be able to walk the streets without fear. That's like God is saying that's going to be one of the big things of the kingdom age, is like children and old people will not have, they can play in the streets without fear. Fourth cycle, civil war, or wars that aren't final. Strife in the countryside moves to the city. We'll see these cycles that happen throughout the, sieges and food scarcity. That's the next cycle. And then the population is cramped, and so that leads to weakness and widespread disease. So like people, this you can see this happen in the Roman Empire. In the Roman Empire, like everyone moved to the cities, and then everyone got sick, and then plagues happened because so many people were living lack of food and those kind of things. Strife in the countryside caused people to move to the cities, and when they all moved to the cities, everyone got sick and everyone was starving, and it created a big problem. And then this is the fifth cycle. So total destruction by a foreign power, cannibalism because of the food shortage. You read that in one of the people boiling children. Israel boiled children. They ate their own children. There's death. People. Maybe I worded this quite wrong, but the idea is that people are participating in idolatry. Part of their idolatry is connected to addictions and abuse of certain things, and so there's death there. And then the buildings are destroyed, industry, and then people are relocated. That's the last thing. People are relocated. All of these things you'll see through the prophets, these prophets predicting these cycles to come. And then you'll read, particularly in Jeremiah, you'll see the things happen. Like something will happen like this, and the people will get right for a moment, and then they'll stop being right. And then the kings will not listen to that, and all of these things. And finally, this fifth cycle hits, and Israel is destroyed. There is cannibalism. All these things that you would think, like, how could this happen? But they get so far from God. They get so far from God and into their adultery and idolatry. And then everything about their nation is destroyed. And what happens is the conquering people take them other places. So they're burning Jerusalem here. This is a picture of the burning of Jerusalem, and they're getting ready to take all these people to different places, to different, the conquering Assyrians, the Babylonians. They would come in and after Israel's record of idolatry, God would move them. And this is the next picture. God would move them. We see the Assyrian Empire was from that northern area. Up in that area, Nineveh was their capital. They came down in there. They brought some people from other territories that they had conquered and redistributed the population. This was like the prophets forecast that this would happen. The people didn't believe it. And then it really did happen, that Assyria and Babylon brought all these, came in, took over Israel and Judah, and redistributed the people. And that's how they took them. Some of them went all the way over into this northern part of Iran and Media, and up in that northern part. And, Jewish people were moved around. The tribes of Israel were moved around like that. So that was the final cycle of discipline, relocation. All right, so we have these two divisions of the prophets, the major ones, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and their length, not their importance. Every word of God is true and important. The minor prophets are shorter. It's just like they're just shorter books, and they are really specific and targeting. They're targeted communications. They have a real focus. These others are big communications, larger communications about that. So we have 17 different books. 11 were written before the captivity. 3 were written during the captivity, which means there was a point in time when all of Israel was out of, there was only a few thousand people living in the nation of Israel and in Jerusalem. And so 11 prophets came. He sent 11 prophets with messages to tell them that the captivity was coming. He didn't stop talking to them during the captivity. During their captivity, God had Daniel and a couple others speak, and then 3 written after the captivity. So here we'll break these down there. That's not so important. So before the captivity, these prophets spoke to the south, which is Judah. Obadiah is like a one chapter book, and then these prophets spoke to the north, Israel. Joel, Jonah, Amos, and Hosea. So these all happened before the Assyrians and the Babylonians made Israel prisoners of war or slaves in their nation, take them back, capture them. And then these, before the captivity, you have Micah, Isaiah, Nahum, these different prophets. And you can see the progression. We'll go back here. 850 BC is the beginning of these writing prophets. So between that period of time is when they started, 850. So God is speaking to them for 140 years here. And then we see God speaking to them for another 300 some years, almost 300 years, to 580 BC. 586 marks the moment when the temple was destroyed. And that's when Israel's light as a nation, or their throne, was completely removed. And that's the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar took them all to Babylon. And then Jeremiah spoke during that period. So during the captivity, we have Daniel is speaking, lamenting, we have Lamentations with Jeremiah lamenting over the destruction of Israel. We have Daniel talking about, living in Babylon, talking about what's going to happen. And then we also have Ezekiel. So Ezekiel is ministering to the captive people, the prisoners of war the slaves that have been taken from their land and are now living in Babylon. Daniel is actually serving in the court of the king of Babylon, and he is getting visions from God about the future of the world empires that will progress. And Lamentations is just a cry. It's like Jeremiah can't believe it. He can't believe that people didn't listen to him. He can't believe that they didn't listen to him, and now the destruction happened. And so it is just like a series of funeral songs, basically, a series of dirges. They're written very categorically, very systematically. And he says, but right in the middle of it, he says, great is your faithfulness. That's the thing. Right in the middle of the darkest book of the Bible, maybe Lamentations, he says, great is your faithfulness and your mercy is new every morning, in the middle of Lamentations 3. So like in the heart of it, even in the midst of that kind of real sad proclamations by the prophet, we still get that. After the captivity, we have these three men, Haggai, Zechariah. Haggai was involved in helping the people rebuild the temple. There was the captivity that lasted 70 years in Babylon, and then when the Babylonian kings fell to the Persians and the Medes, then they were sent back to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple. And Haggai was involved as the preaching. Ezra and Nehemiah were involved in the administration of that, but Haggai was involved in the preaching of that. Zechariah also spoke to that. And then Malachi, after they had rebuilt the temple, we see that there's like, it didn't take long again before the people slipped back into moral trouble. And then Malachi talks about, you guys are not tithing, you guys are not worshiping in the temple, you guys are not treating each other right. And Malachi was the last written message in 400 BC before Jesus came. All right, so we're going to take another break right now, and then when you come back, we'll take a look at Isaiah. There he is, Isaiah, looking, sad, and but we'll talk about Isaiah for the last hour. Okay, so take let's see, come back in 10 minutes. So it's 2 minutes after. So we'll start promptly at 8:13.